Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so did anybody watch Kaylee's Law or remember what Kaylee's Law is? Or can remember to tell me Kaylee's Law? Or kind of a quick recap of it or what it's even about? Everybody's like, no, not me, not me. Okay, so basically, Kaylee was in college in Bend, Oregon, and I'm giving you the shortened view. But Kaylee was walking home one night back to her, I think it was her dorm or her house. And she decided, oh, yeah, that's right. Attendance. So hold on. Let me make sure I made an attendance. So thanks for telling me about attendance. But don't go into it yet. Let me make sure that I made one. So hold on. Give me a second. If you're here, remember that you're on your honor system, so don't do it if you're not here. So let me go in and make sure I made one for today. Okay, go have a look. Go try that right now. Give me some thumbs up if that allows you to do that. All right. Okay. So going on. So anyway, Kaylee was walking home and we kind of covered this a little bit, and we definitely covered this in Introduction to Law Enforcement, CCJ 241, but there is a difference. Some colleges have what we call civilians working in their public safety officer positions, which means they haven't gone through a police academy. They are not commissioned officers. They do not carry guns. They do not have arresting powers. They're just civilians. They're more like what we call a community service officer. I don't even know why they give them an officer title. In my opinion, they shouldn't have an officer title. They shouldn't be called officers. They're more like a civilian that is there to kind of guide you. They're more as someone there to just help you, direct you to call a law enforcement commissioned officer that's been trained and gone through the training if you need assistance. But they're not an officer. They're not commissioned. They haven't been trained. We've already kind of gone over, it costs about $250,000 to train somebody as a commissioned officer, and still they don't know a lot. They're just at the beginning of the stages. They still need a sergeant. They need a lot of assistance. We see still what happens. It's a very scary process. It's a lot of power to give somebody. So to even think about having somebody that's a civilian and calling them an officer, to me, that's a really scary prospect. So Bend, Oregon had civilians that they called public safety officers, and they were in these positions. And Kaylee was walking home, and the public safety officer, who was a civilian, not commissioned, just a civilian, saw her walking home and didn't have good thoughts on his mind and wasn't a good person, and in my opinion was pretty evil. And so he asked her, he stopped his car, and actually he had an SUV, and his SUV, they gave these civilians SUV with cages in the back to transport people. So commissioned officers, when I first started working as a commissioned officer, they didn't even give us cages. In fact, they gave us regular cars that had velour seats in them. They were really nice, but we couldn't transport somebody that we were taking to the detention center behind us because we didn't have cages. So they had to get transported in the front seat with us. And some of the people that I would transport to the detention center weren't very nice to me. They tried to, what's the politically correct way to say this? They opened their mouths and tried to do things with their tongues towards me while I was driving. It wasn't very fun. And I remember having to clean out the velour seat with things that they had done. And so I didn't even have a cage. And so probably when I was on for about 5 years, they finally got cages, and then we could transport in the cages because it was safe because it had a plastic barrier between us. But anyway, they gave these civilian officers working at these universities caged vehicles. And so he had stopped and asked Kaylee, this college student, hey, do you want to ride home? And she was like, she was smart. She's like, no, I don't want to ride home. He gets out of this SUV and he grabs her and he forces her into this caged vehicle. And she loses the battle and he gets her into the caged vehicle and he drives her out to like this desolate area. And I'm not going to go into detail. You can go into detail if you want and read about the case. But he basically takes her outside, tries to sexually assault her. It's not successful. So he beats her over the head with a rock. As she's dying, he sexually assaults her, and then leaves her and she dies. It's one of the most tragic things. And so Kaylee's loss comes out. And it says basically that universities, if you decide not to hire commissioned officers, so if you decide that, hey, we don't need we're so small of a university, or we don't have problems at our university, we don't have enough crime, that we don't need to hire commissioned officers at our university, that we just need to have civilians here to respond to the types of calls that we have, or we have a police department so close that we can call them. You have to follow specific rules, which is now Kaylee's law. You can't wear uniforms that make you look like a real officer, that make the college students there, think that you're a real cop, that think that you're a real university officer. You can't have a cage in your vehicle like this Bend officer did. You can't have lights on top of your car that make your university car, your public safety car, that make students and people think that you're a real cop, you're real university cops. So there's things like that. Does that make sense? And SOU, does anybody know? Why don't you use your chat form right now? What do we have at Southern Oregon University? Do we have commissioned officers that have gone through an academy, or do we have civilians that have not gone through an academy? What do we have, commissioned or civilian? Go ahead and type in what we have.
I have a question.
Yeah, just wait 1 minute. Just type in, let's type in civilian or commissioned. What do you think? We've got two. There we go. We're starting to get some in. Only 3 people. You guys, you don't know that? Oh my gosh. So we have civilians. They're civilians. So at the university, they're civilians. Now, all universities aren't the same. Where I went to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in Nevada, and the University of Nevada, Reno. Both of those were commissioned. So, and they actually had mounted horse units because they have big football teams. And so I went to academies with officers. So they were just like I was a police officer. They were post 1 certified, which meant they could carry guns. They had arresting powers in the state of Nevada. They could do everything I could do. Also, so it just depends what university you're at. Here they work very closely. The public safety officers at Southern Oregon University work very closely with Ashland Police Department. Look how close they are. I mean, they're on the same radio station, so they work very closely with them. So there's been a lot of talk, I know, about Ashland Police Department, responding. And so SOU likes to have, I don't know a lot about it, but they like having their own public safety department, but they are civilians. And Kaylee's law came out because of what happened in Bend. Also, now in Oregon, for any university police department, whether they're commissioned and they carry a gun and they have arresting powers and they go through the police academy or whether they're just civilians, they have to go through a psychological evaluation, which means they're taking the MMPI-2RF, which is you're going to see a psychologist, a forensic psychologist. You're taking a test and you're going through a psychological evaluation. This guy who killed Kaylee and sexually assaulted her didn't go through a psychological evaluation. Who knows if he had done, can you imagine being her parents? If he had gone through that, would Bend University even have hired him? So this Kaylee's Law is huge. Okay, question, go ahead. What is your question?
Oh, okay. So it's kind of not an important question, but what exactly did you mean when you said cages in the back? Because when you first said that, I was picturing like a dog cage in the back, but do you just mean like how in regular patrol cars there's like the barrier to keep them just in the back seat? Is that what you meant?
So cages are, the whole entire back is plastic. So it's not a seat like you think of a regular car has a seat. It's actually plastic, and it's actually kind of formed out in plastic, and there's special seat belts that actually they hook up. There's like a metal magnetic that hook them up to the back barrier between the front of the seat to the back of the seat. And then there's a special barrier that's plastic. So it's a whole caged unit that protects the back from the front. Because what ends up happening, and I don't know why it is, I would probably say, if I had to make a guesstimate, I've never done research on it, but just a rough estimate, probably 30 to 40% of the time that I would arrest suspects, when they get in the back, even though you have them with their hands behind their back and you have them seatbelted in, somehow they get in a position where they try to kick out the back of your window. So it's made specially with the cage design so that it's hard, because it's really easy in a regular car to kick out the rear passenger back of the window. This cage is meant so it's not as easy to do, because what used to happen is when we would put them in the back of a patrol car, like the regular one that I would have, just it's like a regular Crown Vic Ford, when they didn't used to have the cages, is it was really easy when you would put a suspect in the back of a regular patrol car. A suspect, we would put him in the back, they would kick out the rear back passenger window and then shoot out the back and then start running, and we'd lose our suspect. So the cage, it's an actual cage, and you can actually go Google it. I'm going to Google right now and see what to put in if you do it. Maybe I'll share my screen with you. So let's see. Rear cage in police vehicle. Let's see if we can pull up what it looks like. Oh yeah. So hold on. Nope, that didn't pull it up. Oh, you can pull it up. Right now on this, it's requiring a restart on Firefox. But if you just Google rear cage and police vehicle, it'll show you on most of them how it's a whole unit. And what normally happens is a lot of your Ford dealerships will actually make those and sell them, or depends how big your police departments are, but a lot of your police departments will actually have their own garages that'll buy whatever you're buying, whatever type of vehicle you're buying, and then buy those inserts and put them in. So it just kind of depends on what you're buying. But good question. That's not a stupid question at all. That's a really good question.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
What exactly happens when a student presses those emergency buttons, like the blue buttons at the emergency stations on campus? Like, who is called?
So if you're on campus, that's going to go to your public safety department, or it could go to 911. So it depends on which university you're at. Locally here, if you're at SOU, that's going to go to 911, because what happens here, like at SOU, we don't have somebody manning, because we only have one officer on duty at a time. Does that make sense? So they could be out of the office, they could be somewhere. So that's going to go to the local dispatch to make sure if you have an emergency, you're going to get somebody. So we want to make sure you get somebody. But if it's locally here, you're not going to get somebody, because that SOU public safety officer could be responding to a call. They could be in the office, they could be somewhere else. So locally here, it's going to go to the local dispatch center. So it kind of just depends where you are and where it goes. It's really interesting. Where I worked, we had our own dispatchers. We had our own North Las Vegas dispatch centers. Here, it's really interesting. You have your own communication centers that, because you have so many police departments that are small, they're not big enough to pay for their own little dispatch centers. So what they do is they pool their money together and pay for a dispatch center for everybody. Does that make sense? So they don't have their local dispatch centers that are dispatching together, which is pretty smart, so that they're all together and they can all kind of talk and say, okay, you have Ashland PD out here, and you have Talent, and you have Jackson County, so they all kind of talk together. I'm not used to that because I'm used to my dispatchers, just for my department. So that's what happens when you have larger agencies, which can be good and bad in a sense, because you get used to your dispatchers. And so you get kind of, sensitive with your dispatchers, and you don't share as well if you have jurisdictional issues going on. All right, any other questions? All right, so anyway, that's Kaylee's Law. I think it's a good thing that's happened because of the fact of what happened to Kaylee and her death. You can imagine, and just put it in this perspective. Look what's happening right now with what just happened with the defund police. When you have an officer that's gone through all of these things to get hired, all of these hiring processes, and all of this training, and look how bad he went. Can you imagine with a public safety officer working for a university who didn't go through all that hiring, didn't go through a psych eval, didn't go through all that stuff, didn't go through all that training? Can you imagine how bad that is? So it's almost like, it's just scary. So Kaylee's Law is so, in my opinion, so needed on so many levels to keep just somebody that's in a position of trust, just to keep it, again, to make sure that we're keeping the training there, to make sure that we're keeping the trust where it should be. All right. Let me get my PowerPoint open and we'll start in on chapter 4. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Okay. Sorry. I'm using my office computer for once, so it's asking for a few things. So give me a second. There we go. All right, can everybody see that? Look good? Hopefully. Yeah? Okay. Was that yeah? Everybody said yeah? Okay. All right, so this is some more like we are getting into the theory. So some of this is difficult to understand, but make sure you pay attention because we do have some of this stuff on the quiz. Like I said, I'll review with you, but we are getting into a lot of the theory. Okay, so I can tell you that you will see this again. Criminology is the study of crime and punishment. So make sure you know that, because that's where you're at, is in CCJ 230, the American criminal justice system. There are many different schools of thought regarding crime. In fact, long ago, it used to be thought that torture was the way to go, that, hey, that's how you deal with somebody that engages in crime, is you torture them. In fact, they used to take people, they used to say, hey, everybody come down to the main common plaza. We are going to torture somebody. We're going to lay a big, heavy block of concrete on everybody because they just stole a whole bunch of stuff. So we're going to cut off these people's finger, we're going to stretch these people, and we're going to lay concrete on these people. So it just depends on where you're at and what the social norms are. In the second half of the 17th century, so that's in the 1600s, we had a new movement known as the Enlightenment period. So we kind of changed that torture thought, and people were enlightened with what crime and punishment were. And a new thought came known as the classical school of criminology. And it emphasized the ideas that people make choices to commit crime. And therefore, since they make the choice to commit crime, that the punishment should be about preventing future crimes from being committed. All right, so what is the theory of crime? And you're going to need to know this too. The theory of crime is a set of ideas that is used to explain a particular phenomena or concept. So it's basically saying, it's people sitting around, criminologists sitting around going, okay, why did they commit the crime? We have to understand this. We have to, why did this person commit the crime? Is it because of their parents? Is it because of where they grew up? Is it because of their lack of resources? Is it because they had resources? What is it? It it's to help explain what causes the crime and why people engage in behavior, basically, is what the theory of crime is. And the theory of crime is basically divided into two primary categories, and you want to know these. And those two primary categories are the micro and the macro theories of crime. Our micro theory of crime is focusing more on, as it kind of says, micro, so little, the individual differences between law-abiding behaviors and law-violating behaviors. So we're looking at the individual differences between someone abiding by the law and somebody breaking the law. And then we have those macro theories of crime. And again, that's macro big. So we're exploring the larger scale of social explanations, such as poverty. Is it because you grew up and you didn't have the resources? So therefore, that is why the criminal behavior occurred. Okay, so I'm going to put you into some discussion groups, and just for a couple minutes, and you have two questions. I want you to imagine, think about this, and I want you to answer honestly, because I'm not going to know how you answered. So that's why it's really important to answer honestly. I want you to think that you have an opportunity to steal $1 million. Okay, that's a lot of money, $1 million. First, I want you to think that you had no chance of getting caught. None, no chance, zero. Would you steal the money? Okay. The next one is you have a 50% chance of getting caught. So 1, no chance of getting caught. Would you steal it? Yes or no? And 2, 50% chance of getting caught. Okay. So I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. Somebody's going to speak for your group and find out how many of you, if you had no chance of getting caught, would do it. 50% chance of getting caught, how many would do it? Okay. So here we go. Go ahead and go. Give you about 2 minutes to find out. Somebody be a speaker for the room and get me a tally. Go ahead and go. All right, group one, who's my speaker?
Right here.
All right, give me your tally of your groups. How many on number one said that they would steal the money if there was no chance of getting caught?
We all said we would take it, but we said it depends on who it is.
Oh,
Like it's subjective to who we're stealing from, because
okay.
I gave the example of like, if it's some guy who's saved up to start a business with his brother, they just wanted to open a bike shop, I could never take their money.
Okay.
But we said it depends on who it is. So we all would take it. We would all do the first option.
Okay, and how about number two?
We were 50 on that one. We were just divided. It was like 3 out of 6. Yeah,
Okay.
we were divided, but it was the same thing. It would depend on who we were stealing from. And then the people who said they would steal, they said that the person would have to be more deserving of stealing their money than like the first one, like because of the risk they were
Okay.
taking, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. Okay, thank you. Group two.
Everyone in our group decided to steal the money with no chance besides one person.
Okay,
They had the good conscience there.
okay,
But we also did agree we're if it's like a multi-billionaire, we're stealing the money.
okay.
But yeah, obviously not stealing the money from someone who actually needs it. And then I think we were kind of split on number two with the
Okay.
50% chance.
Okay.
Someone
so
said they
kinda-
would do it with 100% chance.
Okay.
So,
All right. Okay, thank you. And group three. I know we had a group three. Anybody? Group three world? Going once?
I was in group 3. We basically said with 100% chance, 2 people said no from what I remember. And then we, at 50% chance, sorry, I need to think for a second. I wasn't paying that much close attention.
I think only 2
The-
people said that they would steal it with 100% chance. So it kind of like switched for 2.
Gotcha. Okay, so what do you, any overall takes from that? What you learned? Do you think this has any play over to our cops, courts, and corrections? What do you think this translates as far as our cops, courts, and corrections?
Yeah, I think this really provides a lot of insight into the fact that if people are given the chance to take advantage of a system, they will. If they will go uncaught or if it'll go undetected. When I grew up, there was a scandal where a lot of the cops who were busting drugs were taking some of the drugs, and we don't know what they were doing with them. But yeah, I think it kind of speaks into the fact that if you could get away with something, the majority of people will decide to take advantage of that opportunity.
Okay, yeah, Alyssa.
I'm pretty sure that this links to a crime theory that the pleasure from the steal isn't as bad as the pain of the punishment, and so pleasure outweighs pain, and therefore you can commit the crime. I forgot exactly what the name of the crime theory was, though.
No, you're right on. You're right on. Anybody else?
I was basically thinking the same thing. Most people don't commit crimes because they're afraid of the consequences, but if there weren't any consequences, then they would probably commit more crimes.
And do you think, I mean, I have personally never heard somebody or seen a student go, I want to be a cop because I want to hurt people. I mean, it'd be pretty hard to get in the profession saying that. Normally, what do they say? What do you think I hear students say that want to be a cop? What do you
They
think?
want to help people. They
They want to help people. I mean, right? It's not like it pays, you're going to become rich, right? It's not like I live in a golden house and I go on extravagant vacations, right? I want to make a difference, right? And then you get to be a cop, and guess what happens? Have you ever heard of cops get jaded? Has anybody ever heard that? Why do you think you hear that saying? Anybody want to tell me why you hear that saying?
I've never heard that saying. I'm
Never
sorry.
heard that saying. Because you go and you arrest people because you see things on the street, and then before you're even done with your report, they're back out on the street when you've seen things happen. And so you start to get jaded because you don't think the system works, because you see people committing crimes over and over and over again, and nothing, you don't think the system works. You don't think there's any rehabilitation. You don't think it works. Sometimes you get jaded. And so you start thinking, just like you guys did, that you can make the system work for yourself, right? You guys just said, it depends. It depends. I would never take money from the person who worked really hard from it, but I would take money from the billionaire. So some of you guys may be ethically challenged. Some may not be ethically challenged. Do we know which cops are going to be ethically challenged when we hire them? Do we know which ones may be morally or ethically challenged when they see certain things? Do we know who that's going to happen to? So that's what this question was showing you. Right now, you know how you feel ethically and morally, and you've just shown me, and I didn't take tabs, but you've just shown me right now, ethically and morally, you can challenge yourself. Imagine when you start seeing some of the things you're going to see in real life as a cop, and you start getting jaded. Do you think you might challenge yourself ethically and morally? So there needs to be, what we're saying right now with the defunding the police is we need some challenges to that. We need more transparency. We need to be checking on our police because they're always challenged. Does that make sense? I just challenged you by asking you about $1 million, and I challenged you ethically and morally. Somebody needs to be checking on you all the time when you're in a job that's challenging you constantly. Does that make sense? No wonder we have issues. We're not checking on in my opinion, our police enough. We're not checking on them enough. There needs to be more checks and balances. That's going to be tough to do. There's not enough funding to do that. I don't know if you're ever going to be in a place with human beings where you can check on them enough and you can have enough rehabilitation. You can have enough, because we're human beings. And you're never going to be in a place where it's perfect, because none of us are going to, do you think we're ever going to agree on a system that's perfect? We're not, we're human beings. So how are we ever going to agree? Look at our country right now, not agreeing on what we're doing. So it's tough. You're in a system right now. I guarantee you, if I was in a cop car and all of you were riding with me and I pulled somebody over for speeding, I guarantee when I made a decision on whether to cite, warn, or talk to that person on what that person did wrong, we all wouldn't agree on what I did. I guarantee it. Guarantee it. We could not all come to a consensus on how to handle the situation if that person broke the law, because we're human beings, right? That's why we have judges. Judges make decisions every day. When a cop pulls somebody over, when a cop stops somebody and tickets them or arrests them or does something, doesn't the judge make a decision on what that cop did, whether or not to throw the ticket out or to send them to jail? Don't juries do that as well? Do we all agree? We don't. We're always making decisions. Don't you? Isn't that what the Supreme Court does? What does the Supreme Court do? How about answer this in your chat group? Does the Supreme Court always agree? How many Supreme Court members? Okay, answer this. I know I keep going back and forth, but how many Supreme Court members are there on the Supreme Court? Answer this on your chat group. And you can Google it real fast if you don't know. I'll wait. If you don't know, that's fine. You should, but if you don't, Google it so you don't appear. How many Supreme Court justices are there on the United States SCOTUS, Supreme Court? And then answer it in your chat group. I don't see any chats coming through. This really scares me for my students in college.
Isn't it 9, if I remember correctly?
Everyone has submitted chats.
Oh,
Yeah,
shoot,
literally
I
not
just
seeing
didn't
that.
scroll
Just
down.
so you
Thank
know,
God. I
everyone
didn't
has
see anything
submitted in the
coming
chat.
through. Okay. I just didn't scroll down. I was getting so scared. 9. Why is there 9? Why is it an odd number? Why is it an odd number?
So
So there's
that
no
they don't
ties.
tie.
Why?
So they can't tie.
So they can't tie because we all don't agree, right? So you start to see where I'm coming from because we all don't agree. And that's what keeps us in balance in our criminal justice system. That's why we have what's called our checks and balances. Okay. So that's what you're starting to see. And that's what you're seeing in police. We need a checks and balances, and it needs to be constant. Okay. It's never going to be fixed. You're never going to hear it go, it's fixed. It's a balance that's always going to be going, whoa, whoa. Okay, we're going a little over here. Oh, we're going a little over here. Whoa, because we're dealing with human beings and you can never give too much, but it's always going to be a checks and balances. All right, let's continue on.
Can I add
Yeah,
like
yeah.
okay? I put this in the chat, but
Did I miss it?
like-
Because I wasn't scrolling down. Sorry, catch me if I do that.
it's okay. Like the other reason that we have checks and balances is because of the huge position of power that those people are placed into. Like it's the same, you learn about the same thing when you learn about the systems of government, like judicial, I never remember the X one. But like I always want to say execution. That's not the word.
Executive power are you talking about? Or what are you talking about?
Like the 3 systems of government, like judicial branch and whatever. Anyways, there's checks and balances throughout like the governmental system because of the positions of power that people are placed
Yep.
in, even though they don't always work very well, but like that's the same reason that we need checks and balances.
See, Tiffany, we were saying the same thing. I just didn't see it because I hadn't scrolled all the way up. But that's what we were saying. The checks, that's why we have it, is because we need that checks. And that's why we have a Senate. That's why we have the House. That's why we have the legislative. That's why we have the executive. That's why we have the checks and balances. That's
Executive, that's the word.
Yes, executive. That's why we have that's why when we have cops, we have a sergeant and we have a lieutenant and we have administration. We have all, now sometimes does it break down? It does. And that's why, but we need all these executive branches and that's why a lot of good police departments like mine that I work for will have what we call civilians as well that they bring in. In our use of force review board once a month, we brought in civilians as well. We had defensive tactics experts that came in. We had sergeants, we had regular officers, we had everybody that came in and would say, okay, so we had different perspectives. Does that make sense? So we had a civilian that had no idea because they weren't an expert, they weren't a cop. So we had those eyes that looked from it. It's your checks and balances. And it's amazing when you do that, you get to see it from different perspectives. So good job. All right. Any other questions before we head back to the PowerPoint? All right. All right, so that fun discussion question that always brings up tons of stuff. All right, so everybody remember the blue dress, the gold dress, right? So what do you see, blue or gold? I love this because my son always sees gold, I see blue, we all see different. Or the Yanny Laurel, right? What do you see, Yanny Laurel here? It's so funny when this first came out, I think my son and husband were listening to it for like 15 minutes until it switched. I don't know if you guys heard it. I had to listen to it. I think I still hear Yanny before Laurel, it's just all over but it just lets you know perspective. And I hope the one thing that you've learned from this is perspective. That sometimes we have tunnel vision. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own binoculars that we forget to open up our world to everybody else. So please don't forget that. And that's what I loved about being an officer was I used to live so much like this in my own little world. And being an officer opened it. I got to see so much. I got to see the world beyond just my own. And it's kind of sad because I'm back to seeing my world, and so many people that see their world, they get so focused on their own world. And I have to so often say, stop. It's not just your world. The world is so much larger, and stop viewing it from just your world, because it's not. And unless you've been out there, you can't say. So stop. And I use the word ignorant a lot, but it's true. Unless you've been out there and seen or talked to a lot of people, not just one person, or Googled one person has said, or read, or done something, or lived it, or worked it. See, I can say some things because I worked it for 20 years. So I feel like I can say some things, but if all you've done is kind of read some research, I don't sometimes feel that you can do that. So be careful when you say some things with that. Or I have some people that say, well, I have a friend that said that. Be careful too, because sometimes you don't want to talk for your friend unless you have their approval, because your friend may not want you out there saying what they said. So, because sometimes that gets around. So just be careful. All right, next time we're going to watch this. If you've been in my classes, I've shown this before. This is going to be our icebreaker next time. I love this because, again, it shows you about our brains and how they're elastic. And gosh, I love this video. So if I forget to show this, it's about a bike. So please don't let me forget, how I always forget about attendance. All right, moving on. If I'm missing something in chat, somebody speak up, because I'm not checking chat when I share screen. So somebody speak up. All right, we're back to theory. Classical school of theory. We have what's called the rational choice school, which means it's pretty easy. It is what it says, which just basically says that people have free will and they choose to commit the crime. So if Jordan decides to steal some candy at the store, he's not forced to do it. He's not predestined to do it. If he wants to choose the candy, he thinks about it and he says to himself, I really want some candy, so I don't have any money, so I'm going to steal it. There's also what we call hedonism, and the classical school assume that people really are out to seek pleasure, and they're out to avoid pain. They don't like pain. So when Jordan sees that candy in the store and he don't have no money, he thinks about how it's going to bring him some pleasure. So he goes and steals that candy because he eats that candy and it tastes good and it brings him pleasure. So that's what we call hedonism. All right, so the classical theory of crime has some key principles. One is on punishment. Remember how we said the key idea of hedonism is where people seek pleasure and try to avoid pain. Again, if Jordan thinks about stealing the candy, he realizes he could go to jail for it. He might not steal it because he's trying to avoid jail. So that's a key principle. These are all common things. If you just think about them, they're common. We also have the idea of deterrence. Deterrence is also in there, that threat of punishment. So we're always thinking about, you know, hey, I don't want to go to jail, so that's going to influence my behavior because I'm a rational person and I have free will and I'm hedonistic. I want pleasure, but I also want to avoid pain. It's kind of that oven where I want to touch that oven, you know, but it's hot and it's going to hurt, so I'm not going to touch it. So that's the idea of deterrence. That's why we have it out there. But we also know how well does that work, because we used to have torture, and you would think that people seeing people getting their fingers cut off and people getting big old blocks of concrete laying on them where that would suffocate them to death would work, and didn't work too good because people still did it, right? Still committed crime. So, And here's deterrence, and you do need to know what this means. And it discourages action through instilling fear about consequences. Basically, you deter crime by instilling fear. You make people fear. And Beccaria, Caesar Beccaria, said, if you are swift and you are certain and you are severe, you need to know those three things. So if you are swift, certain, and severe, then hey, that's the classical deterrence doctrine. You will deter crime. So swift, certain, and severe is the classical deterrence doctrine of crime that is the hallmark of Beccaria's doctrine. That's the way you get people to fear crime, or fear committing crime at least. All right, so this is kind of a triangle of looking at what crime prevention is, a theory of it, and a triangle of looking at what crime deterrence is. So under crime prevention theory, you have to have the three things, which is a desire to commit the crime, the ability to commit the crime, and the opportunity to commit the crime. And then under the crime deterrence, you have to have the desire to commit the crime. So that's the same, but then here's where we change. You have to have that likelihood of being caught, and then the gravity of harm if caught. So the only thing that's the same is our desire. All right, so deterrence again is our fear of committing the crime, where we use punishment to keep people from committing crime. Punishment must be proportionate to the harm caused. Can't be used to avenge the crime, obviously, because then you get into vigilantism. All right, don't worry about this one. This just kind of goes into the classical theories of crime, and this one isn't really important. Okay, now we're into the rational choice theory. We're going to go over this and we'll stop with the rational choice theory today. So the rational choice theory, we kind of started with it a little bit. And again, it's what it says is Chris wants to know why the intruder broke into his apartment and stole his thing. Is it because the intruder was born with a biological defect that made him choose that particular apartment? Or is it because something in the intruder's upbringing made him a criminal? Or was it something else? Let's see. So the rational choice theory say that criminals make logical choices about under what circumstances to commit the crime. So they're making a rational choice. So an example is perhaps the burglar saw that Chris had left a window open to his apartment. And if the window hadn't been open, the burglar would have moved on, looking for an easier target. But the open window gave the criminal an opportunity to rationally consider options and to realize that his job was made easier by that open window. So that burglar made the rational choice, hey, open window? Maybe I can get some stuff inside the house to sell and make some money. An important element of rational choice theory is the idea that people will weigh the possibility of pleasure from committing the crime against the possibility of pain from punishments, and then they'll act accordingly. This is known as hedonistic calculus. The word hedonism means seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And calculus is a type of math. We've all heard that, right? So essentially, hedonistic calculus is doing math around the idea of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. So we've kind of done a roundabout way about that, but it's basically just, hey, is it worth it? And a lot of criminals will say, hey, I'm already on probation. I'm going to go back to jail anyway. I need the money anyway. I'm already in trouble anyway, so I might as well do it. The window's open. I walked by it. It's there for a reason. You'll hear that a lot. So this kind of makes a lot of sense sometimes. All right, so we're going to stop here. Next week, we're going to finish, or not next week, Thursday, we're going to finish up with our theory. We're going to go into what your assignment is and your, as far as your journal this week and a review of the quiz. Don't let me forget to do attendance and watch the bike video. Do we have any questions before we end?
When is our next quiz?
You have, let me go look. That I think it's quiz 2. You do. You have journal 4A, which I'm going to explain on Thursday. And then you have quiz 2, which is over chapters 4 and 5, which I will review on Thursday. Does that sound good?
Okay.